Imagine you are an early human walking through the savannah thousands of years ago. You see this large tan animal with sharp teeth and a mane. You learn very quickly that this specific animal is dangerous, so you run.
Right, you get out of there.
Exactly. But imagine if your brain wasn't capable of grouping similar things together. Like the next day, you see another lion, but maybe it's a little darker or missing some fur. If you had to completely relearn that this slightly different lion was also going to eat you, well, you probably wouldn't have survived the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, we would have gone extinct. The human nervous system, and really the nervous system of any organism, is fundamentally optimized to group similar stimuli together just to save cognitive load.
Makes sense.
Right. If we had to be explicitly trained on every single tiny variation of a stimulus in our environment, we literally wouldn't be able to function.
Which brings us to the fascinating and honestly sometimes really frustrating behavioral mechanism where this exact survival trait kind of misfires. Like, when a toddler learns to call their father daddy and then suddenly starts shouting daddy at the mailman or the guy at the grocery store.
Or every single bearded man on television. It's the exact same neurological and behavioral process at work, just applied to a modern social context.
Yeah.
The brain is basically saying, close enough, I know what response to emit here.
And unpacking that close enough mechanism is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to a very special deep dive curated specifically for you, the listener, as part of the Behavioral Intelligence Con Mara Sánchez BCBA study series. Today, we are jumping right into the deep end of Domain B of the BCBA exam.
We are. Specifically, we're tackling task list item B14, which is identifying examples of stimulus generalization. It's one of those concepts that is completely foundational to the science, but it's notorious for tripping up test takers.
Oh, absolutely. So to make sure you have the ultimate guide to this, we are pulling from a really rich stack of sources today. We've got the foundational Cooper, Heron, and Heward textbook, the white book itself.
The Bible of ABA.
Exactly. Plus, we are bringing comprehensive study guides and clinical case studies from the BAS, the Behavior Analyst Supervisor, mock exams.
And our mission today is simple. By the end of this deep dive, you are not just going to memorize a definition, you are going to understand the underlying behavioral mechanics of generalization.
Right. You'll recognize exactly how the exam tries to trick you, and more importantly, you will know how to apply this to actually change lives in your clinical practice. Because, passing the exam is just the baseline.
Exactly. The real goal is applying this science to facilitate meaningful, sustainable independence for the clients you serve. So let's start by defining our terms, but let's keep it grounded.
Yeah, let's do that. So, stimulus generalization happens when a behavior that was formally trained in the presence of one specific stimulus is evoked by a new similar stimulus. And the absolute key here is that this happens without any additional training.
That lack of additional training is the defining variable. If you have to teach the response again in the presence of the new stimulus, well, you are just teaching a new discrimination. Generalization means the behavior spreads completely on its own.
A great way to visualize this is the classic QWERTY keyboard analogy. When you first learned to type, maybe it was on a clunky old desktop PC in a school computer lab.
Oh yeah, those giant beige monitors.
Yes. So you built up this very specific repertoire of typing behaviors in the presence of those specific chunky plastic keys. But today, you can go to a coffee shop, sit down in front of a sleek Mac laptop with flat keys, or even pull out your smartphone with a tiny digital glass keyboard, and you just seamlessly type out an email.
Right. The actual physical keyboards are demonstrably different.
Yeah.
But they evoke the exact same typing behavior. You never had to take a separate typing class for your iPhone.
Exactly. Taking that a step further, the underlying behavioral mechanic of why you automatically know how to type on the Mac is rooted in the physical properties of the environment.
Precisely. The new stimulus, the Mac keyboard, shares formal physical properties with the original controlling stimulus, the PC keyboard. The spatial layout of the letters is identical.
So the original training environment and the new environment share enough DNA, so to speak, to trigger the same behavior.
We do. And in behavior analysis, we don't just guess at how much DNA they need to share. We actually map it out using what's called a generalization gradient.
Oh, right, the gradient.
Yeah, as we look at the research, we have to talk about the classic 1956 study by Gutman and Kalish. They demonstrated this mechanism beautifully with pigeons. They trained pigeons to peck at a key, but they only reinforced the pecking when the key was illuminated by a
Like a specific shade of yellowish green, right?
Exactly, a specific yellowish green. So the pigeons learned that the yellow-green light equals food if I peck. But then Gutman and Kalish did something brilliant. They stopped giving food entirely.
Just totally cut off the reinforcement?
Yep, put it on extinction. And then they started changing the color of the light on the key, presenting different wavelengths from pure yellow to pure green to blue. And they measured how many times the pigeons pecked.
And what did they find?
What they found was a gradient, basically a bell curve. The pigeons pecked the most at the original yellowish-green light, but they still pecked quite a bit at a light that was just slightly more yellow or slightly more green.
But as the color got further and further away from the original training stimulus, the rate of pecking steadily dropped off.
Exactly. So if we graph that, we have a peak in the middle for the exact original stimulus, and the slopes fall away on either side as the stimuli get more and more different.
That paints a really clear picture, and this is where the terminology becomes crucial for the exam, right? Because if that gradient is flat, meaning the slope is very gradual and wide, and the pigeon is pecking at almost any color of light, that actually indicates low stimulus control.
You nailed it. And low stimulus control is the defining hallmark of high stimulus generalization. The behavior is happening across a wide, flat range of different stimuli.
Wait, let me push back on this for a second, because as behavior analysts, we spend our entire careers trying to establish tight stimulus control. We want behavior to come under the control of specific antecedents.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive.
Right. So why is low stimulus control suddenly the goal here? Aren't we supposed to want precision?
That is the exact paradox that trips up so many students on the exam. Low stimulus control isn't inherently bad, just like tight stimulus control is inherently good. It entirely depends on the context and the social validity of the behavior.
Okay, so it's situational.
Exactly. Think about a wide generalization gradient as a floodlight and tight stimulus control as a laser pointer. If you are teaching a learner to greet their peers, you want a floodlight. You want low stimulus control regarding which peer they greet.
So you want them saying hello to everyone in the hallway, not just the one specific kid you practice with in the clinic.
Exactly. You want the behavior to bleed over into new stimuli. That's good generalization. But if you're teaching a child to cross a busy intersection, you need that laser pointer.
Because you want tight stimulus control. You only want the walking behavior evoked when the specific white walk sign is illuminated.
Right. Not when the light is yellow or when a car is honking or when someone else jaywalks. You need laser precision there.
That floodlight versus laser pointer analogy completely clarifies it. We want loose control, the floodlight, for some skills, and tight control for others. Which naturally brings us to what happens when that floodlight shines on the wrong things.
Yeah, because sometimes responding to similar stimuli creates significant clinical issues. When the floodlight is too wide, we see the dark side of stimulus generalization.
The behavior spreads to environments where it is no longer appropriate or functional. Let's bring in a case study from the BAS mock exams to illustrate this. There is a classic scenario about a toddler named Amy.
Oh, the Dada example.
Yes. So Amy learns to call her father Dada. Now, her father has a very prominent beard and mustache. Over time, Amy builds a strong history of reinforcement. She gets attention, smiles, gets picked up, all for emitting the verbal behavior Dada in the presence of her father's facial hair.
In behavioral terms, the specific physical feature of the facial hair has become the controlling antecedent stimulus.
Right. But because of stimulus generalization, Amy starts calling all men with beards, Dada! The mailman walks up to the porch, Dada! The guy standing in line behind them at the grocery store, Dada.
It's a perfect example. The new stimuli, these random bearded men, share formal physical properties with her father, so they evoke the exact same verbal response. It's high stimulus generalization and low stimulus control.
She is failing to discriminate between her actual father and other men who just happen to look vaguely like him.
Exactly. And this is the pivot point in clinical practice. When generalization goes too far, we have to introduce stimulus discrimination training. We have to turn that floodlight back into a laser pointer.
So if I'm the BCBA in this case, I have to engineer the environment to teach her that not all beards are created equal. I would assume we do this through differential reinforcement.
You've hit the nail on the head. We have to reinforce the response, Dada, when the actual dad is there, and actively extinguish it when the mailman is there.
So we establish her actual father as the discriminative stimulus, or the SD.
Right. The SD is essentially a green light. It signals to Amy that reinforcement is currently available for saying Dada.
No.
When she says it to him, she gets the cheers and the hugs.
But the bearded mailman acts as a stimulus delta, or S delta. And the S delta is the red light. It signals that reinforcement is on vacation. It is not available for that specific behavior.
Precisely. So when the mailman approaches and Amy says da-da, we put that response on extinction. We withhold the reinforcement. We don't cheer. We don't pick her up.
We might gently correct her and say, no, that's the mailman.
Exactly. And over time, through repeated trials of reinforcing the SD and extinguishing the S delta, the behavior of saying da-da comes under tight stimulus control.
This highlights the core difference that you, the listener, absolutely have to burn into your memory for the exam. Generalization is emitting the same response to multiple stimuli. That is your loose control, your floodlight.
And discrimination is responding differently to different stimuli. That is your tight control, your laser pointer. Generalization groups things together, and discrimination tells them apart.
Okay, so bridging this into clinical treatment plans. We know about this delicate balance between generalization and discrimination, but how do we actively program the floodlight?
Well, early on in ABA, practitioners used a strategy that is literally called train and hope.
Train and hope. That sounds terrible.
It really is. They would teach a skill in a sterile clinic room and just cross their fingers that the client would magically do it at home or at school. And train and hope is universally recognized as a failed strategy.
Yeah, the sources we are pulling from today heavily emphasize this. If we look at the seminal 1977 paper by Stokes and Baer, which is required reading for any behavior analyst, they stated unequivocally that generalization should be programmed rather than expected or lamented.
Or lamented. I love that part. Because when a client does something perfectly at the clinic table on Tuesday and then completely fails to do it at the grocery store on Wednesday, it is incredibly easy to blame the client or lament the situation.
But Stokes and Baer are saying, no, that's on you as the clinician. You didn't program for the grocery store.
Exactly. We have to engineer the generalization. We have to weave it into the very fabric of the intervention from day one.
Stokes and Baer outlined several specific tactics to do this, and the mock exams test your ability to recognize these tactics in action. Let's look at a clinical scenario from the BAS materials to see what this engineering looks like.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have a case study about a 7-year-old named Anaya. She's learning to use functional communication. Specifically, her goal is to hand a physical break card to her teacher when she feels overwhelmed by academic demands, instead of engaging in property destruction.
Which is a critical, socially valid replacement behavior.
Yeah.
But it only matters if it generalizes.
Right. Anaya's BCBA, Adrian, knows that if Anaya only ever practices handing this card to her primary special education teacher while sitting at her specific blue desk in the corner of the room, the skill is going to get trapped there.
The tight stimulus control of the blue desk will prevent the behavior from spreading.
Exactly. So Adrian actively programs for stimulus generalization using a tactic called training multiple exemplars. He doesn't just change the icon on the card. He specifically teaches Anaya to hand the break card to various people.
Like the teacher's aide, the speech therapist, the gym teacher.
Yes. And he does this in different settings, like the noisy cafeteria and out on the playground.
Adrian is systematically expanding the stimulus class that evokes the behavior. By introducing all these different people and environments during the training phase, he is ensuring that the internal private event, that feeling of being overwhelmed, is the primary stimulus that evokes the break card exchange.
Regardless of who is standing in front of her or what room she is in, here is another incredible scenario from the mock exams featuring a learner named Carlos.
Oh, I think I know this one.
Yeah, Carlos was explicitly taught the ASL sign for more during snack time to request additional crackers. But then a few weeks later, without any direct training from his BCBA, Carlos is on the floor playing with blocks. The teacher stops playing, and Carlos spontaneously signs more to ask for more playtime.
That is the absolute dream scenario for a behavior analyst.
It gets better. Later that afternoon, a teacher finishes reading a book, and he signs more to ask for another story.
Wow. Carlos is demonstrating spontaneous stimulus generalization. The intervention was highly successful because the behavior, the motor response of signing more, generalized to new, completely untrained antecedent stimuli.
The termination of playtime and the closing of a book became new stimuli that evoked the same functional communication response. It's amazing when you see it happen in a clinic.
But it's important to remember, this happens in everyday life too. The study guides mentioned a relatable example about a guy named Nick, who is an avid skier.
Right. Nick usually skis at his local mountain and hits these small, manageable snow ramps. He has a long history of reinforcement for jumping off these small ramps and landing safely.
Then he travels out west to a new, massive mountain and encounters a giant ramp he has never seen before. What does he do?
He skis right up to it, jumps off, and sticks the landing.
Exactly. Even though the magnitude of the stimulus changed dramatically, from a small ramp to a massive one, the formal physical properties of the new ramp were similar enough to his training environment to evoke the exact same thrill-seeking jumping behavior. The behavior generalized across stimuli.
Okay, so these clinical case studies and real-world examples make total sense when we talk them out, but let's be real with the listener for a second.
Yeah, let's talk about the exam.
When you are sitting in that testing center staring at a screen, the BCBA exam is going to use incredibly tricky wording. They aren't just testing if you know the definition, they are testing the absolute limits of your conceptual understanding by actively trying to trap you.
The exam is notorious for presenting scenarios that look like one concept but are actually masking another. And when it comes to generalization, there is one specific trap that catches students more than any other.
The ultimate pitfall. According to the data from the mock exams, the #1 mistake test takers make here is confusing stimulus generalization with response generalization.
And just to make it harder, the exam will sometimes refer to response generalization as response induction. They sound identical, and they both involve behavior spreading, but behaviorally and mechanically, they are entirely different processes.
If you don't have a systematic way to tell them apart, the exam questions will tie you in knots.
Let's break down the ultimate cheat code from the study guides for keeping these two distinct. Let's start with what we've been discussing today. Stimulus generalization.
Lay it on us.
The formula you need to memorize here is one response, multiple stimuli. You have a single, specific behavior in a learner's repertoire, and they emit that exact same behavior across a variety of different environments or triggers.
Like the toddler saying, plane.
Exactly. Think of a toddler who learns the verbal tact plane. Then they look up and see a massive Boeing 747, they point and say plane. Later, they see a tiny single-engine Cessna, they say plane. The next day, they see a helicopter, they say plane.
So it is one single response, the word plane, being evoked by multiple physically different visual stimuli.
Right. One response, multiple stimuli. The environment changes, the behavior stays the same.
So if that's stimulus generalization, what is response generalization?
Response generalization, or response induction, is the exact inverse. The formula is one stimulus, multiple functionally equivalent responses.
Okay, so in this scenario, the environment stays exactly the same. The trigger doesn't change.
But the learner's behavior varies. They emit new, untrained responses that all serve the same purpose.
I can picture this. Imagine a UPS worker drops off a package at your front door. The delivery of the package by the worker is the single controlling stimulus.
Right, that's the one stimulus.
And when you were a kid, your parents explicitly trained you to say thank you when someone hands you something. But today, the UPS worker hands you the box, and instead of saying the trained thank you, you say, have a nice day.
Or maybe you smile and say, awesome, my new shoes are here.
Exactly. You emitted multiple novel verbal responses that you were never directly trained to say in that specific context. But they all serve the exact same social function in response to that one single stimulus.
That's a perfect illustration. The stimulus, the delivery driver, remained constant, but your repertoire of responses expanded. That is response induction.
So speaking directly to you, the listener, as you prepare for this exam, here is your actionable test-taking strategy. When you are reading a dense paragraph about a client doing something in a classroom, I want you to stop, take a breath, and ask yourself one simple diagnostic question.
Did the environment change, or did the client's behavior change? That question will save you on test day. It cuts right through the jargon.
If the scenario explicitly states that the learner went to a new school or met a new substitute teacher or encountered a new type of dog and they did the exact same thing they always do, well, the environment changed. New stimuli. That is stimulus generalization.
But if the scenario says the learner is sitting at the exact same desk with the exact same math worksheet, but today they asked for a break by raising their hand instead of handing over a break card, the behavior changed.
New response. That is response generalization.
And we also need to remind you how to double-check for discrimination versus generalization within these questions, because the exam will try to blur those lines too.
Definitely. When you are reading a question, actively scan the text for differential reinforcement.
If the scenario involves a practitioner deliberately reinforcing one specific action and deliberately extinguishing another, like the dad getting reinforced and the mailman getting ignored, you are looking at discrimination, not generalization.
Discrimination is an active sorting process engineered by differential reinforcement. If you see reinforcement and extinction happening side by side in the same scenario, the answer is discrimination.
That is a massive key for unlocking these tricky questions. It all comes down to analyzing the contingencies in play rather than just reading the narrative of the story.
So we have thoroughly unpacked the what and the how. We've looked at when the floodlight shines too broadly. We've discussed how to program it clinically using Stokes and Baer's methods. And we've mapped out exactly how to beat the exam traps.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a higher level thought to chew on as you continue studying.
And it goes back to a fascinating theoretical question posed by Stokes and Baer that really pushes the boundaries of what we do in applied behavior analysis. We know we have to program for generalization, right? We have to train multiple exemplars.
Right. We can't just train and hope.
But they asked, is it possible to train someone to be a generalized generalizer?
A generalized generalizer. It sounds like a sci-fi concept, but what does it actually mean for a client?
It means, can we teach a learner to automatically look for similarities in their environment on their own? Can we teach them the overarching rule of generalizing so that they automatically generalize every newly acquired skill moving forward?
So essentially, Stokes and Baer were asking if we can hack the learning process itself.
Exactly. So the learner becomes an active, independent agent in generalizing their own behavior without the BCBA having to painstakingly engineer every single environment.
Wow. Hacking the learning process so the client does the heavy lifting of generalization for you. That isn't just a clinical trick, that is the ultimate definition of true independence for a neurodivergent learner.
It completely changes the entire trajectory of a person's life when they don't just learn a skill, but they learn how to learn and apply that skill across every context they encounter.
And that is the real reason we study this science. It's something for you to mull over as you hit the books today. Remember the floodlight versus the laser pointer. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We truly hope this clarified the mechanics of stimulus generalization for you and gave you the tools you need to tackle Domain B.
It is a complex topic, but mastering it is essential, both for the exam and for your future clients.
Absolutely. And we want to directly invite you to continue your BCBA exam journey by tuning into the rest of the Behavioral Intelligence Con Mara Sánchez BCBA study series. There is so much more great analytical content coming your way to help you absolutely crush this exam.
Keep looking for these concepts in your everyday life. Watch how your own behavior generalizes. It makes the material stick.
And for more incredible resources, comprehensive study guides, and support to get you across the finish line, make sure you follow Amethyst Therapy Services. You can visit their website right now at www.amethysttherapyservices.com.
Or if you have specific questions or need guidance on your studying, reach out via email at info@amethysttherapyservices.com. They are a fantastic resource for future BCBAs who want to really understand the science, not just memorize it.
So the next time you look at a behavioral scenario, don't just look for a single isolated behavior. Look at the whole environment, look at the shifting stimuli, the floodlights, the laser pointers, and map out the contingencies. You have the tools to navigate them now. Thanks for listening.